At Bain, one of our favorite tools for interviews to assess whether people could make strategy simple was the market sizing framework question. We would ask a very simple question and then just let them go off in any direction they wanted. In this episode, you get to hear from Matt Plummer, who is ex-Bridgespan, as the interviewee in the hot seat, and me, Jenny Rae, as the interviewer running the interview. We both walk through the interview and then provide feedback at the end. I'm here with Matt Plummer, who is about to become a famous case interviewee, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I've been training for a long time.
Matt has an amazing background. He's worked in corporate, he worked for Bridgespan, and he's offered to come today to show us how market sizing is done. And of course, I'm not going to be nice to you. I'm going to push on a whole bunch of things, but we'll have some fun in the process at least.
I would expect nothing less.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into this. I'll read you the prompt of the question.
Great.
The goal for this is that we're mirroring a Bain-Style first round interview, probably more targeted at undergrad, that would do this as kind of a, let's call it a math plus or a strategy case that's wrapped with mostly a math question.
Okay.
And so I've come up with a question that I think is kind of interesting and it'll be fun to walk through it with you today.
Great. Awesome.
Great. So the question is that we serve a large conglomerate that does direct to consumer lamps and other small furniture pieces for homes. So think accessorizing features, baskets, small side tables, etc. They do these flat packed and they are successful in the US. They've been operating for about 4 years. The company's interested in entering the Mexican market as one of their closest neighbors from a logistical standpoint. And they're interested in sizing the market specifically for their lamp segment. So they're wondering how many lamps are sold every year in Mexico and what does that mean for the client? Do you have any questions about the background?
Great. Yeah, and about what's the market share, market size that they have in the U.S. at this point?
Great. Let's assume that it's a pretty fragmented market, so under 10%, but still what they would consider to be a sizable share.
Great. Well, is it okay if I take a minute or two to write down the structure for this?
Take as much time as you need.
All right, great.
Matt took just under 2 minutes to develop the structure on paper before coming back to explain it.
Okay. And just to clarify, is it okay if I focus on lamps that would be, I'm thinking like a conventional lamp that you would find in the house, either on a desk or even a standing lamp that would be in like a living room type versus like something that would show up more like in an office space or in a shop.
Tell me why you think that makes sense to focus on. I'll let you do it, but you have to convince me.
Yeah, I think so. As I think about the Mexican market, I think that it's probably a broader residential market at this point. Particularly because there's likely to be some underdeveloped areas that are unlikely to have as much of the either corporate furniture or the more industrial furniture.
Great. Then let's go for that.
Great. So first I would start with what is the population of Mexico?
Okay.
And then we want to know, how is that broken into households?
Okay.
And then, how many lamps does each household have? And then, what's the roughly the amount that a household would spend on a lamp?
Okay.
So does that basic structure seem to make sense?
Seems to make sense to me. Why don't you walk through what some of the data would be?
Okay. So population of Mexico. So know that the United States is, around 325 million. I'd guess it's, maybe around a third of that. So I'd say, let's say 125 million.
Okay. Why would you guess it's a third?
Just based on, I'm thinking about the rough size of the country and the number of urban centers there compared to the U.S. So it seems like that would be, not bordering on half, but yeah.
Okay.
Under that.
Scarily close. It's about 130 million. So we
Awesome.
can use 135
Great.
or 130, sorry, as our number. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And then, number of households. So if you have 130 million people, if I think that the number of children per family is likely to be higher there in the States. And so if I start with an assumption of a 2 and then adjust off of that, I'd say, it's probably going to be a bit higher. So I might say something closer to 2.5 around for a household number.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. And then number of lamps per household. So, I'm thinking to my own experience of how many lamps would I, have I in the houses I've been, number of rooms per house. So, if we think of a 2-bedroom, for example, which maybe is an average in the States, and then I'll adjust for Mexico. So you have 5 rooms maybe in a 2-bedroom. And let's say there's probably about 1 or 2 lamps per room. So I'll say seven lamps in a US household. So I might think that household size or the houses might be a bit smaller on average. And so I don't know. I think 5 is probably a rough estimate of how many lamps you would find in a house.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Now, I reserve the right to disagree with these later. Don't take my numbers as a sign of enforcement or approval. Okay, go ahead.
Great. So thinking about how much someone would spend on a lamp, in the States, probably I'm thinking around $30. And so Mexico, I would expect it to be a bit cheaper. Let's say 20 pesos.
Okay. Do you know what the currency exchange rate is?
I was going to add, I don't know.
Why don't we just do it in dollars?
Okay.
We can always convert it later.
Okay.
So
right.
are you thinking $30 to $20? Or are you thinking
so I think it would be more like $20 if it was a 1-to-1 exchange rate.
Fair.
So, all right. So we'll do, $20. Okay. So then, should I run through the math?
Go for it.
Okay. So we have 130 million. We want to divide that by the number of households there are. So I'm just going to do some quick here. So 5. So we're talking about 50 million there times 5 lamps per household, which is 250 million times $20 per lamp. So we're talking about 5 billion there in US dollars.
Okay.
So for a full market size in Mexico, we're saying that for lamps, household lamps, that it would be a roughly 5 billion.
Now, what does that 5 billion represent specifically?
So that represents the total spend in Mexico for residential household lamps.
Totally. Would we think about it in total, or is there a better way to think about it that would maybe match up with our revenue estimates?
So we could look at you mentioned the market share in the beginning of what we have in the US, and you mentioned it was a fragmented market.
Yep.
If we're entering a new market, there's likely to be some established players. So we would, if we have 10% in the US, my guess is at least starting off, we would have even lower than that. Mm-hmm. So if I'd just say 5% of that.
I'm poking on one other thing too. So 5 billion represents all of the lamps that anyone would own in Mexico. But if we think about the market size, what if we did it on a per year basis?
Okay. Yeah. So how often are people buying those?
Totally.
lamps?
How would you factor that into your numbers as well?
So I guess, what's the replacement frequency of the lamps? And so, I'm thinking about lamps last quite a long time. So I would say my guess, and I think this might even be a little aggressive, would be 10 years lifespan of a lamp. I could imagine it being longer, but let's say 10 years.
Okay.
So then essentially if people are going to buy them every 10 years, then they're only for the amount that's being purchased in a year, it's going to be 1/10 of that. So 500 million.
Great. So then we would take the 500 million, we'd measure it up against the market share.
Right.
Great. So what's your strategic assessment of this?
So if we're just going to write some numbers. So 500 million. And then we said that, maybe you could assume you have 5% of that going into it, which is 25 million per year. So they've been at it 4 years in the US and they have 10% market share. And this offers potentially a $25 million market on a yearly basis. without knowing, without knowing the full size of the market in the US and going through that, my guess would be this doesn't feel like a huge market to me. I would want to consider it relative to their other growth opportunities and see how it compares to that. But my sense is that this would be a moderate opportunity based on potentially other opportunities they would have.
Great. Okay, relax. Let's just talk about it really quickly. So I took a couple of notes as you were going through it. Overall, good job. I like you. I could see that you could do the work, and you were very receptive to my pushback, which is definitely an important thing from a Bain interview perspective. And so I thought your notes and your clarifying questions were really good. I wasn't sure at the beginning when you asked about the market share where you were going to tie that in, but then when I saw later that you added it back into the strategy, I thought that was a really good question. So I was concerned at the beginning that you were just asking me random strategic questions without really thinking about the implications of them. Maybe just one hint would be to push a little bit more into identifying why you're asking the question.
Okay.
I want to know market share because. And you also asked about the other adjacent markets, and I kind of pushed back on that too. And I said, why would you want to know? And what you're saying is essentially, I'm interested in this, but I also would think that the opportunity will be bigger than just lamps. So what would we think about for that? Then your numbers, I thought that your structure was pretty good. That one piece at the end of the replacement rate, I think would be pretty standard. So that's why I was just asking you at the beginning, I'd really want you to define, here's why I want to go after households. And then this is the piece that, we really have to focus on. And here's why we're calculating it in this. But I think most of the time for Bain, I'd probably want it in the annual basis just because it's most markets are going to feel big, not knowing how long it's going to take to replace things, or maybe too small if something has a more frequent replacement rate. And then I would want you, when you go through the household explanation, to just defend yourself. Tell me at the beginning, I want to do households, and here's what I did. So I thought you were very polite about that and asking permission for it. But just explaining, I built the structure around the household market because I think it's the most important, gets me right to where I would want to go. And then I still might reserve the right to tweak it. And then one final tip about that piece, at the end of the case, I probably would have gone back to that assumption because that 25 million is probably underestimating the full size of the market because you only carved out households in the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Other than that, I thought your assumptions were pretty reasonable. I couldn't believe that you actually knew close-ish the population of Mexico. We usually get people around the 50 million mark or the classic 100 million guess where they are. So I thought that was a pretty good estimate. The 2.5 on households, I was really worried when you said that because that's not the easiest number from a calculation standpoint. So anyhow, you did a good job with the calculations for that. And then the 5 was good. I was really glad that you picked an easy number and defended it. And I thought your defense was good. And then the 20 was also pretty good from a calculation standpoint. And your calculations, I didn't see major issues with. So across the board, I really liked the bigger picture. And I feel like you could have tied a few of those things together. But overall, really good job. And thanks for walking through the market sizing case.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you would like to get better at market sizing questions, they're amazing tools to think about strategy simply. You can work with us at managementconsulted.com or send us an email if you have questions and need more cases. We're happy to provide them. In addition, please subscribe to our podcast. We'd love to have you back for future episodes. And if possible, leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining.